This is an interview episode. I have created these interviews in order to expose new insights into what it takes to become a polymath or a master in a particular field. The intent of these interviews is to cover a wide, broad view of different subject areas so that my listeners may be exposed to new ideas, maybe become inspired to go out and explore a new area of learning themselves. If nothing else, we can all learn from masters in their own trades. How many hours did it take? What kind of work is necessary? How much planning? How much pain? How much sacrifice? These are all traits that we all should be aware of before we start on our next learning endeavor. Welcome, polymaths, dabblers, trivia ninjas, skill collectors, knowledge adventurers, and masters of your domain. I am Paul the Polymath, and this is Cast, the podcast that dives deep into knowledge, acquisition skills, and the theory of learning. This is a special episode. We have a guest interview. I would like to welcome Chad Ruff. He is a fly fisherman, physical education teacher, and hunting guide. He plays guitar, shoots a bow, can renovate your kitchen, and he knows his corn seed. His Tier 3 skills include home brewing and woodworking. You can find out more about his guided elk harvests at coloradoelkoutfitters.com, and you can find out that link in my show notes. Welcome, Chad.
How's it going? I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. All right, so I think you've already listened to an episode, and you know about dabblers.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd just start right there. And so have you dabbled?
I have been a dabbler. Yes.
Tell me a story about a dabble.
I am notorious for starting projects, finishing projects, and not finishing projects. So my best dabble is probably my rod building because as you mentioned, I'm an avid fisherman. So I'm like, I'm going to build fly rods. And I would actually even throw some of that rod building into some of my Tier 3 stuff. But I thought the best dabble was like Tonkin bamboo. So I bought all the stuff because I wanted to make the Tonkin bamboo fly rods. And I made it as far as researching it, buying it, and then said no. Got bored with it, moved on. So it's still in my garage, and that's a fond memory because it's just one of those things that are, I don't know, it's still on my plate. So I guess I'm still dabbling with it, I guess.
All right.
So I don't even know. Does that hit a dabble? That would be my latest dabble.
That's your latest dabble?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we are about here is connecting different areas of knowledge.
Yeah.
And your main top Tier 1 skills, your 10,000 hour skills. You've got the fact that you're an educator, and you're a hunting guide. And have you created any connections between those two things? Have you made those?
As in connections, I guess like I've had a lot of overlap. For example, I teach outdoor ed. That's one of those things that I pushed for. It's like, hey, I can run a heck of a outdoor ed program. And so I've used a lot of my guiding experience and working with adults to influence my outdoor ed curriculum. And vice versa. It's been, I think, the most beneficial thing for me in the guiding world is my people skills. And all of that comes from my years in education. If you can teach middle schoolers, you can teach grumpy old men. So that's where, I guess, some of the overlap that I've seen with my jobs. That right off the bat, what I can remember.
So give me an example of dealing with grumpy old men that relates to dealing with middle schoolers.
All right. Well, we have to keep it clean, right? So I can't use the swear words that middle schoolers and grumpy old men use.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I've actually only been guiding for 4 years officially. I've been unofficially guiding since 2011. And by unofficially, I mean I've been taking out friends and family, and I've been doing all the legwork, getting them on elk. My father-in-law, I love him to death. And I can talk a little bit about him because I don't know, he's not podcast savvy yet, so it'll be a while before he hears this. But Anyway, yeah, so my father-in-law, love him to death, but he's kind of one of those old codgers. And when I tried to take him out, get him on elk for the first time, it was a series of, I don't want to go up this hill. I don't want to go down this. And just kind of the constant whining and bickering until finally we started to see the results. Okay, keep that in mind. Whining and bickering of a grumpy old man. Well, every day in my job with middle schoolers, it's like, oh, I don't want to do the warm-up. Oh, I don't want to do this. And so you have tricks and traits of how to speak to people to get them to be convinced on that. So that's kind of a memory that I have. And also, now that I am guiding officially for Colorado Elk Outfitters, or CEO, so I'll probably use it as short for CEO. But every year we get guys, I mean, the trips are pretty, there's not a lot of physical ability that you need to get to them. You just have to be able to walk to a tree stand. But that walk to the tree stand, guys are so out of shape. I've overlapped some of my physical activity stuff and be like, well, hey, try doing this stretch before we go out tomorrow. So there's a little overlap there too with it. So it's hard to draw an exact pin, but hopefully that's a couple examples.
Sure. So, question for you. How many hours does it take to become a reasonable hobbyist to where you might have a chance of getting yourself onto an elk without hiring a guide?
Oh, man. Let's throw the best experience. Getting lucky is your best bet. But to answer the question, I would say, I'll just use my experience. So I have been hunting. My dad took me hunting when I was about 13, I think is when I first started. And then I got a little more serious when I was 16 because I was able to drive myself. And then for the last 12 years, I haven't missed a season. My success rate didn't become what it is without at least, say, 500 hours of staring at maps, putting boots on the ground, hiking into places, and then you finally get a spot and something changes. There's a fire or anything like that. So I would say the first 4 or 5 years, I was skunked, and it was just a learning period. Now, I was doing that by myself. So my learning curve has been drastically decreased as I've immersed myself into it. So I've met guys who've been doing it for 30 years. I've talked to the pros in the industry. I've got some of the latest elk calls, and I've learned how to use them. And so I think you can drop that learning curve, but for the most part, it's going to take 500 hours minimum to help you get onto elk or deer. Elk are a little more difficult. I'd say, yeah, that's my magic number, about 500, because that amounts to what? About 2 years in the off season, 2 to 3 years of just hard work.
Okay, so nobody should just go out, purchase a weapon, get a tag, and expect to bring home dinner.
No, actually, in my opinion, that's the worst thing that can happen to someone getting into hunting. So, short story here. I have a really good friend, and without going on a whole tangent of the Colorado licensing system for big game, let's just say there was an accident. I put in for a unit, and we did a group tag, which they allow to do in Colorado. A group, you put in as a group. Well, we put my buddies in as a group, and they drew the same tag as I did. Well, that tag was an elk unit tag. They did an elk hunt. Well, I've been doing this unofficial guiding for 6 years now, and they jumped on. We went there, and I got 2 of my friends, got them onto elk their first year. It was awesome. We were happy. We had elk steaks, awesome organic meat, just great camp. The following year, the expectation was, well, why didn't we get an elk? And it's like, well, you got to put a lot of work into it. So, in my opinion, that could be the worst thing that could happen to somebody. Having that climactic moment of success without that struggle.
That being said, if a person's willing to put in the 2 years of 500 hours and get to that point where they're reasonably able to put themselves into a situation where they could get an animal,
yeah,
how many more hours is it to become a passable elk hunter where you can actually say, I'm an elk hunter and I know what I'm doing? And you would be in a place to where if you took your son out or you took a friend out to get them onto an elk with you reliably well so that you create a positive experience for that person. So what's that next tier, that tier 2? How many hours do you think it would be for a person to expect to spend on that?
Yeah, well, I guess I was kind of misleading that. So I think the 500 hours would give you an idea of how to read some maps and the patterns of elk and that kind of stuff and get you the boots on the ground. So I think after that you could probably get into some, but to be confident in your hunting ability, double that'd be probably that tier 2, where you're at that, those 3,000 hours is where I mean, I really don't want to. I'm a pretty humble guy, so I hate when I brag about myself. But I have a pretty good idea. I can look at a map without going to an area and give you 5 or 6 spots that there's a good chance there'll be elk, just by reading the map, knowing the terrain, knowing the animals, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the thing it boils down to, is just your time in the field. When you can put that time in, get your boots dirty kind of thing, it really can drop your learning curve. Or if that's what I'm trying to say, yeah, make that a little easier learning curve. You still have to put the hours in. So I'd say that tier 2, that 3,000 hours, for you to get to where you can look at something and say, okay, the elk are going to probably come here during this time of year. There's going to be a drainage that they'll follow. They're looking at this kind of vegetation. Cows are going to eat on broadleafs when the temperature's this, and the bulls are going to go do this with the cows. And so, like, all of that I've compiled. I have like 4 notebooks of notes that I've wrote just on elk hunting stuff. So
Awesome. So how would we compare that? So just once again, a comparison between different, or connections between 2 different skill sets. How would you compare that quarry of elk versus the quarry of a large native trout, Colorado waters, that are being well fished, and so they're educated?
yeah,
And tying your own, going from the roots of it, tying your own fly on a hand-built rod, the master angler.
I think that's like there's a lot of parallels there. And I think you could even go something as abstract as teaching, right? But we'll use the fishing example to start. With that, I mean, it's got a lot of the same thing. How do you read a water? You know, what kind of flies are coming off? What hatches? Are there bait fish? What's the water temperature? Is there water rising, water dropping? Like all of that. You can learn all of that, but it does no good if you don't put time in on the stream and actually applying it. So I think a lot of that with elk and fishing kind of overlap. I could draw some comparisons to teaching. Like you're also a teacher. We both went through the teaching practicum and induction process, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I think the thought behind it is, well, we need to expose teachers to so many hours, so many preparations. I mean, ideally, isn't that what your student teaching's for? To get you hours of contact. I know when I was in college, we literally had an hour log that I had to get all these hours of contact and learning teaching strategies. So, but I guess my question, can I ask you a question? This conversation?
Absolutely.
Well, like, where does this apply? Like, because you can spend time doing stuff, but if you're not doing it a proper way, or if you're not applying a practice or a motivation to it, is it worth anything?
See, and that's where that practice is different than just time spent. So one of the things that I advocate for,
Yeah.
and there's going to be, well, it's probably already out by now, an entire episode just on practicing and what that actually means. So practicing is not just repetition. It's not just time spent, but it has to be purposeful. It has to be goal-oriented.
Okay.
It has to be focused. You have to be bringing something to the table with that time, with the intent to improve. Now, with certain skill sets, just spending time with it and putting in repetitions is going to make you better, right?
Yeah.
Just because you're going to be more comfortable with it, you're going to be more natural at it after a while, just because you spent the time with it. Like, think about when we first learned language.
Oh, yeah.
All right, you're not going to tell a toddler, you have to be focused.
Yeah, right.
You have to be paying attention now.
Yeah.
You have to, when you're practicing your words, that's not what we do, right? There's an innate thing in humans where we want to emulate, where we want to focus, and we want to make our time as efficient as possible so that we can get benefits quickly. And so those kinds of hours are different, I think, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. I'd
And
agree with that.
As a tier 1 skill fisherman myself, right, I would say that there's huge differences between different techniques.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Trolling.
I could make an argument that general fishing skill, like I fished for saltwater species, I've fished for everything in freshwater from drum to muskie.
Yeah.
Right? Those are all different techniques that require different knowledges, and some of those fish are very, very difficult to find and to, catch. But if you wanted to specialize, and I think this is where fly fishing is a little bit different, I would say that fly fishing for me is a tier 2 skill
Okay.
if you just isolated that, right? So if I took that and separated it out from the rest, I've never made a handmade rod, but I have been tying flies since I was about 10 years old. But for me, elk hunting is a tier 3 maybe,
Yeah.
right? Like I have had tags for 6 years and never gotten an animal, put in tons of hours around pursuing that. So I guess that's what I'm asking is, what are the similarities in the amount of
Okay.
time? So like I know what it takes to catch a trout with a spinner, and I can reliably do that. Like walk out, 2 casts, catch a trout.
Yeah. Yeah.
Catching a trout with a wet fly, now you're talking a little bit more knowledge required.
You can't cast it out and swing it through the pocket and then do the European lift.
It's
No?
a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah. And then a dry fly
Yeah.
is now a whole nother level,
Yeah.
right?
Okay, I get.
And then fishing with a weight 3 rod versus a weight 7 rod.
Yeah. We could geek out on fishing
We could,
stuff
we
for
could,
a whole,
we
whole
could,
podcast.
we could.
Yeah.
So if that answers the question,
It does.
But,
yeah.
But essentially, what I'm saying is that there's got to be some connections. So for me, an example would be fishing and artwork. It's about the process and knowing that at the end of it, you may not have something that's ever worth sharing, even the story, right?
Yeah.
But knowing that long term, that process is going to lead to an outcome which is acceptable to you. So going into the process of both of them, I've drawn parallels, and I'm more comfortable now with going into a fishing experience and coming home with nothing.
Yeah.
Because I draw parallels to that artwork.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, and I guess the other thing, now that you're saying that, a lot of my hunting skills, again, have come through others. I've spoken with those who have succeeded in it. And so I'm intentionally making it a point to learn about elk hunting. And so once I find those maps, once I find the areas I want to go, it's not that I'm just going out and taking a walk. I'm going out intentionally looking for sign. I'm looking for broadleaf plants that I know elk digest. I'm looking for grasses. And so, yeah, it goes back to those hours. 500 hours, I think, of intentional practice will get you a chance at, well, you always have a chance because it's hunting, but it gives you a pretty good odds of, I have an idea of where to go and can find elk. Think you add double that, get to that 1,000 to maybe even 1,500, 3,000 area. I know that's a big spread, but then you can start getting into, okay, I can go and see elk yearly. Start seeing them every year. And a lot of that, I think, is just learning the animal's movements. And I mean, there are hundreds of books on that topic. So we don't need to discuss that too much. But the overlays, I think the cool thing about it, too, is with your tier 1, 2, and 3 systems, again, I kind of fall back on teaching. And a lot of that can play right into it no matter your subject area. You know, I teach PE. I'm a phys ed major. Can I go teach math? Probably. I know how. Am I going to be as effective in it? Not as much as PE, but I have at least those 1,000. I'd say I'm a tier 2, at least just in my people skills. And so I could go into any classroom. I feel confident enough. I can go to any classroom and teach the subject. But my expertise, my tier 1, is, it sounds silly, but preschool, early childhood. And that's a whole different story, but I have that. I have kinesiology, exercise, phys. So yeah, that's when you were telling me about your tier 1, 2, and 3 systems. Like that was just an automatic light bulb. Oh yeah, I got this. And then you get down to like my tier 3, which is my lowest tier. I've just picked up woodworking. And not that I promote tobacco use, but I have a very strong fascination with wooden pipes. Like I've seen these really cool engraved wooden pipes. And so on my fishing trips, I try to find like fruit woods, and it's really hard to find, but you can find like fruit woods that become driftwood, and you make these awesome wooden pipes out of them. And so like that is my latest woodworking tier 3. But again, I'm learning all of that intentionally. I just don't have the hours in yet.
That's a great way. That's a great perspective, a great way to learn things, right? So on that very same topic, like as we dig a little bit deeper here, So once you get that 10,000 hours of elk hunting in, and you can get clients now to have that experience, and for them that might be their dabble, right? They are coming to the state and you're leading them, and if they're listening, if they're paying attention, they're abbreviating maybe that tier 3 experience because they're learning from a master in the trade.
I would agree. Yeah. I think 90% of my clients who come out, they have hunting experience, and they actually probably have more hunting experience than me, but they don't have that in elk. A lot we do due to advertisement and that kind of stuff. We have a big push of guys from like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and the Midwest who are primarily white-tailed deer hunters. So they have all this white-tailed deer knowledge, and they come out and they hunt elk. Well, that elk's a dabble for them because it is a different hunting process. Now, do they know how to fire a gun and use a bow? Well, yeah, because they have that background knowledge. But I think the elk hunt, like you mentioned, that's their little dabble. Because occasionally we get guys who repeat, but it's more of a, oh, yep, went out, I did myself a Rocky Mountain elk hunt, I'm going to go back to my whitetail. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's more than just hunting. It's the subcategories as well.
Right. And so then you get that 10,000 hours in, and this is another thing. I think people that don't do this particular skill, there's going to be a lot of people listening to this podcast that this is a brand new experience for them, and I hope that they listen through to the end of this, right, so that they can learn something about it, whether or not they ever plan on hunting or whether or not it's an ethical issue for them. You know that I'm a vegetarian now.
Yeah.
Even though I've spent my life in the outdoors. So I don't struggle with that anymore. I think there are some interesting philosophical trails that we could go down, but we're not going to do that right now. But the question is then, you get this 10,000 hours in, you're really good at getting an elk with a rifle, which, you know, with a modern rifle, you can take that elk down at several hundred meters.
Oh, yeah.
And you step that up to a bow now. How many more hours do we have to layer on top of that mastery skill before we're now able to get within 30 meters of that elk to drop it with a broadhead?
I would almost say, like, among the tiers, because let's just say your tier 3 is hunting in general. We got the guys from the Midwest who have 20 years of whitetail hunting. So they're really good at whitetail hunting. Well, I still would say that they're a tier 3 if they came out here. Different environment, different animal, that kind of stuff. And a lot of that, like with a rifle, too. You could be a master in the rifle. Once you switch to a bow, or even go into more of a specific, like hunting's the general idea. Well, then you have, of all the hunting, you have muzzle loading, archery, bow. You can even go into trapping. Like all those little subcategories, I think you have to you would start at a tier 3 almost. Like a master of archery is a totally different beast than the dude who's a master with the rifle. Now, can they both go out and harvest elk? Yeah. But can the guy who's mastered archery hunting and has zero background knowledge with a rifle, can they go out and harvest elk? Maybe. Probably. Are they going to be as effective? No. So I guess the other thing is, like think about it in the music world, right? If we have a percussion major, right? And he has 1,000 hours behind a drum set. Well, can they pick up a trombone and go play, ragtime jazz music? Probably not. But do they have an understanding of rhythm and beats? Well, yeah, they're that skill level up. So they may come in being a trombone master at that tier 3 level. It's kind of what I'm wrapping my brain around, So I don't know. I can't really answer that question. I don't know. So, because your question was, how many more hours would a guy who's archery hunting, or vice versa, a rifle firearm hunter, to be an archery hunter, how many more hours? I would say it would just boot you back to that tier 3. You'd almost have to do another 500,000 hours. Like just to learn the equipment, learn the habits and everything. And I think each subject's a little different too. But I don't know. We got to try it and find out.
There's only one way to find out.
There's only one way to find out. I got to go practice some more.
Sweet. So to wrap up, what we essentially discovered today is that within the realm of your particular skill sets, that there is overlap, and you do draw from each.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
That specializing in hunting could be specializing in one particular quarry, just like with fishing.
Well, and while you're saying this, let me interject real quick, because like the specialization stuff, I think let's take somebody, expert mushroom hunter, who spends numerous hours outdoors, or a botanist, somebody who understands like plants, animals, and they decide to pick up hunting. Well, in my mind, it's going to be so much easier for them to pick up what elk are going to be doing because of their background knowledge. So like that specialization in sports, I see so many, the days of the Dave Logans of the world where they're, drafted in 3 different sports, I think are over, because everybody's so specialized, and I'm not okay with that. Like, we need the well-rounded.
We need the polymaths.
The polymaths. Yeah. The whole reason we have this podcast, right? Yeah. So I think that's, if you can broaden all of your activities, even if you're a master in one, you're going to have overlap. Even in teaching, I can firmly say, like, my mastery in teaching is the reason why I feel like I'm a good guide. Not because I know elk, it's because I know how to treat people. And so, yeah, that polymath theory, we've talked about that having coffee on our first hour break, and that's a big thing that hits home with both of us. And well, I'm gonna speak for you, but yeah, I just had to interject with that. So anyways, I'll let you do the closure, finish that out. But
well, no, that's great. So once again, folks, this is Chad Ruff, expert in teaching, expert in elk guiding, expert in fly fishing. He's got several tier 2 skills. We never got to his tier 3 skills, his home brewing, but we did talk about his woodworking. Just keep in mind, the goal, of course, for all of us is to broaden our skill sets, to make those connections, to put in the hours of practice, purposeful, intent, focused. And next week, another episode of CAST, Knowledge, Acquisitions, Skills, and Theory of Learning. If you are a master of a trade, skill, or body of knowledge and would like to be interviewed on my show, please email me at paulthepolymath@gmail.com. Put in the subject line, interview, and I will respond and perhaps have you on an upcoming show.